Well, hi everybody. This is Elsie Souza from Bookstore One, Sarasota. I'm delighted that you're joining us. I'll tell you something about myself. I am the oldest employee and the oldest employee at Bookstore One, Sarasota. And it gives me a great deal of pleasure to welcome you to Fast Fallen Women. And I want to introduce Georgia Court. Georgia is the owner of Bookstore One Sarasota, a dear friend to all. I think she's a Renaissance woman. I think she's a Pied Piper, and I think she's given fallen women a place at the table. So, Georgia, take it away.
Thank you, Elsie. Well, I hope you mean fallen women in the very best possible sense of
Absolutely.
Absolutely. But we're fortunate today because we have with us the wonderful Gina Barreca. Gina is the author of 10 books, including the best-selling They Used to Call Me Snow White, But I Drifted, Babes in Boyland, A Personal History of Co-Education in the Ivy League, Sweet Revenge, The Wicked Delights of Getting Even, and It's Not That I'm Bitter, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying About Visible Panty Lines and Conquered the World. Her work has been translated into several languages, including Chinese, Japanese, Spanish, German, and Portuguese. She has also edited 17 collections, including the Penguin Book of Women's Humor and the Signet Book of American Humor. She's a Board of Trustees Distinguished Professor of English Literature at the University of Connecticut. She's written regularly for the New York Times, the Chicago Tribune, Cosmopolitan, Ms., and the Chronicle of Education, and she's been deemed a feminist humor maven by Ms., called Smart and Funny by People magazine, and she has appeared often as a repeat guest on CNN, Today, NPR, Oprah, Good Morning America, and she is a lecturer all over the place. So please welcome Gina Barreca. And you need to unmute, Gina. But those of you who are in the audience, if I might ask you to mute yourselves, and there will be, so we don't hear the ambient noise behind you. And there will be a time a few minutes in where we're going to ask you to join us in the conversation. But in the meantime, keep your microphones muted, please. Hello, Gina. And Elsie's going to join us. Her sign says Tony Souza, but don't let that fool you. Her name is Elsie. She just likes to pretend it's Tony. So
there are times we'd all like to pretend it's Tony. There are times when being Tony would have got us ahead of the line, or to get more attention at Home Depot, or if I could, you know, I could have spoken at the dinner table in my Italian family with a lot more confidence if I'd been named Tony. Let's just face it, there are times when Tony is a great person to be, and they're often wonderful to be around. So that's terrific. And Georgia, it's just a delight to be back at Bookstore One. You're so kind to authors always. And you know,
we love you.
Well, that's so nice. But it's a sense of community that a bookstore brings, and that's what you offer to everybody. You offer us a place to go, and that's why it's important for readers as well as writers to understand that supporting the bookstore, to buying our stuff at the local independent bookstore, means the world to everybody. So I'm particularly happy to be here tonight, and because I feel like, you know, we're old friends at this point. These are conversations that we've had about a lot of different topics, mostly having to do with women's lives and women's stories and our take on
like it now,
and that's a pretty good thing. So the new book, which I shamelessly have right here because I am a bad girl, is Fast Fallen Women, and it is it's an incredible collection. One of our writers, Cindy Eastman, is here, and who, you know, there are 75 pieces of flash fiction, nonfiction, meaning that every piece is under 750 words. And I don't think that I'm the only one who really reads when she can, in the moments of time that she can grab out of the day. I read, you know, I'm teaching still at UConn, where I've been for 36 years this
Yay
year.
for you.
It's really, it's a, you know, it was one of those things when I first started, I thought, well, this will be my first job.
Yeah.
You know, I thought you know, at that point I thought I would have, you know, my a forever marriage. The marriage ended, the job stayed, you know, so that's been 36 years. Now I am happily married to the right husband, but and for 33 years. But you know, it's funny what you think is going to pass, that doesn't, and what you think is going to stay, and what goes. So the sort of definitions of fallen women fall into that category. But so 75 writers agreed, I mean, I'm one of them, but so 74 writers agreed to contribute their works to this book. And one of the great things about these collections that I've been fortunate enough to do for Woodhull Press is that there are writers who have reputations that we've all known for years, like Jane Smiley, who won the Pulitzer Prize for literature for 1,000 Acres, who wrote the great, hilarious academic novel Moo, who you know, it just one after the other novel and book of essays. Smiley's last book of essays is the most important things in the world, right? Most important topics in the world. Brilliant set of essays. I suggest you all buy that. It's just terrific. So she wrote for the book. Bobby Ann Mason, who you probably remember, wrote for the book. Amy Tan they're all original pieces just for Fast Fallen Women. And Honor Moore, people, Lynn Perrell, writers who have been in everywhere you've ever read. And there are a lot of writers who have strong followings and reputations. Journalists, Angela Bonavoglia, she and I were lucky enough, I'm sure, Georgia and Elsie, that the book is at Bookstore One. It's the new book that's coming out of the collected essays from Ms. Magazine, 50 years of Ms. And so both Angela and I both have essays in that book. So, which we didn't know until, you know, we both saw our names mentioned in one of the reviews, and it was like, oh, it's nice. We've been doing this for how long that, you know, we're plucked as representing our decades, you know. And then, you know, Cindy Eastman, who is published, has been in other of the collections, and other writers whose voices need to be in there. And then there were brand new writers, and some of those brand new writers are 65, and some of the brand new writers are 20. There are a lot of people who are finding their voices at different ages in different ways, but they may not have had the courage or the opportunity, or just, you know, the figured out the roadmap to getting published. And so new writers come in all different sort of versions. So there are many new writers and emerging writers, some of whom are just getting started, some of whom have been writing for a long time, but just haven't sent out their work for publication before. So it's a lot of definition of what counts as a fallen woman.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's an interesting title, though. So how, you know, the fast, funny women, I get, because, you know, that's you, Gina, right? And the fast, fierce women, that's you. Wow. Fast, fallen women. Okay. What's that?
So much me. So much me. I mean, after a certain point, and whether that's 16, 22, 35, you know, it could be like playing bingo. There are very few of us who are not in some way identify as fallen.
Yeah.
That there are, you know, Jane Smiley, again, the other night at an event, was talking about that both she and Amy Tan, senior writers, established writers, both took the fallen literally.
Exactly.
Yes,
Yeah.
right. Amy certainly did.
Amy certainly did. I mean, it's like a list of don't put magazines next to the bed when you go to sleep at night because you're going to get up in the middle of the night and fall on them. She has a wonderful series of pieces of excellent advice, but she also has the wonderfully ambiguous line, Amy Dan, um, lift your hem. And it's both literal and figurative in terms of you have to be careful about lifting your hem. I mean, you can't trip over it, but we have all been warned not to make it too short in our days. And so that's great. And Jane is talking about falling down or tripping on a walk, on a hike. She's a hiker and was warning against that. But I took full in my essay is about the other woman.
I read, you know, when I read that, I was so sorry to interrupt you, but when I read
Nope.
that, I'm like, I was so surprised and like, oh my God, I need to hear this story of this woman. We all know one, but
We
were
all
you
know
one of those women?
Well, this is what you know. I write it in the second person, but the whole idea about it, the other woman is she's not as different as you think she is,
Oh,
you know, and that you can, I think everybody does know or has been another woman. It could be your best friend, it could be your sister, somebody that you don't know has been in an affair, has had an affair, and because it is something that embarrasses women, shames women so deeply, it doesn't stop us from doing it. You know, there are a lot of women who what they do before they get married is not to get engaged, but to get divorced. You know, there are different rituals in terms of things, and that you know that, but it's what we don't talk about, and what we decided as a way to sort of advertise or sort of sum up the tagline for the book is that Fast Fallen Women gives whispered conversations a full voice. So that there are Joyce Saltman, who spends part of her year down in Florida, who's very, very funny, and Eileen Beckerman, who wrote the great book that, again, you probably heard of, Love, Loss, and What I Wore, that the Efron sisters actually produced on Broadway. It's a brilliant book, which takes a woman's, she wrote it, Eileen wrote it, Gingy, as I know her, wrote it in her 60s, and it became a bestseller. But they're sort of one-page lines and illustrations that take you through this woman's life and what she was wearing the first time that she realized that other girls in her class didn't want to be her friend, you know, in fourth grade. What she wore, like for her first pair of pumps, she grew up in Manhattan, so going to Macy's to buy her first pair of shoes that had a little lift to them. The first time that she was dumped by a boyfriend in high school, when she lost her virginity at the Dartmouth Winter Carnival. And so, I mean, it was in 1960, I think, or I don't remember the year exactly, but she writes about that. I mean, she writes about that in Fast Fallen Women. So she writes, both she and Joyce Saltman write about what it was like in terms of steps for petting, which I didn't realize was so carefully calibrated. I mean, I'm 66. It's not that I'm that much younger than they are, but things had, you know, sort of become slightly less rigid by the time I was in high school and in college. You know, we were following the second wave of feminism. They were just entering it. And so things had been dismantled a little bit for me. And so it was hilarious to get both of their essays and see how much it was like the first base, the second base, the third base, that it was as if they were reading from a memo that they'd received from their mothers or from whatever. So that was
petting
hilarious.
for dummies. Right.
Right. That's very good. I mean, because it really was, but it was the idea of being the dangerous girl, you know, like how far were you going to go and what kind of territory were you going to allow? And it was, you know, above the blouse or below the bra and I mean, it was like the Marshall Plan, you know, it was like dividing up Europe. After the war, it's like I couldn't keep track. I was just like breathing heavy and, you know, wondering what was going to happen next. They had some kind of education about this, and I thought this was much more formalized than anything I got I was sort of interested in where that secret information came from.
Yeah,
And they're hilarious and very young women writing now. They were writers in their 20s. And Laura Rossi is listening in, and Laura asked a really interesting question the other evening about how is it different for girls today. And the part of the answer to that is that they're so tough on judging themselves that their idea of being bad, the voice inside their head, I mean, we all judged ourselves, but they come in, and if they ate something that wasn't healthy,
Mhm.
like if they come in and say, I was bad today. And I think, ooh, like, did you sleep with your cousin? Like, what do you mean you were bad today? And there's like, I ate half a muffin. And I'm
Yeah.
like, oh, that's so not being bad.
Right.
That's a different thing. They're brought up in a way to see their health for this sense of perfection that is in different, even in other arenas that I
Mhm.
feel like
I
have to
don't
deal
think
with.
they're Italian then, if they're eating a half a muffin.
No, it crosses cultural
Oh,
boundaries
good.
in ways
All right. Okay.
that surprise me. But I do, it is the idea that you can never be good enough, because they're not only comparing themselves to like other girls in their class, they're comparing themselves to everybody on Instagram and everybody on
Right.
TikTok and everybody on social media. So I mean, I was just comparing myself to like Mindy Kaufman, because she could wear mascara 2 years before everybody else. But they're comparing themselves to supermodels or to girls who are influencers by the time they're 14. And they're like, well, how come I'm not an influencer yet? And thinking, you're 14, you should, you're barely crossing the street by yourself. You don't have to be an influencer, but and they're worried about what their scores are in school. And, they're at 15, they're worried about where they're going to go to college. And if they're, and it, there is another level of public performance that I'm seeing from younger women, particularly for very young women, that makes me feel like, not that we had it easy, because I don't believe that for a minute, but that, the game has changed, and sex might be something that they don't think about having, in the same way that we thought that it was going to make or break us. But they do think that their SATs are going to either make or destroy their lives. And I'm not sure that one is really better than the other. I think I'd rather neck.
Yeah, well, right, but what's considered important or dangerous, because Gina, I'm considerably older than you are, but when this is before the pill, when people were dating, and the very worst thing that could happen to a female was to get pregnant before being married, and that was a huge issue. And that has gone away. I mean, after the pill came in, and particularly in the last maybe generation, that fear has been removed. And the fear of being a fallen woman in that way, I think, is largely gone.
I think that that's a fascinating frame for this, Georgia, because of course now we do need to go back to worrying about things, because I mean, did you ever think we were going to live to see R.V. Wade overturned? I mean, that's astonishing. What we have taken for granted, or many of us have taken for granted as a right.
Right.
We didn't defend it enough. We believed that this was now something that was won. And believing this one meant not having to keep going back and reaffirming and making sure that it couldn't be breached and that it couldn't be done. And what's interesting in terms of motherhood, because there are many, many essays in the book that have to do with parenthood, whether it's being a daughter and wondering if you were a bad daughter, which again apparently doesn't change with age, that we're all daughters, and that you continue to be a daughter long after your parents have passed, and that you still negotiate with those relationships. My mother died when I was 16, and one of the things that I dedicate the book to different groups, people, and I said to every to every girl who lost her virginity but kept the box it came in,
Yeah.
which I always think is an important idea. And but I also dedicated to my mother, who did lose her virginity before marriage, and talked to me about it as if it was this great loss and this thing that she did that somehow made her, like, it made it impossible for her to be a truly good woman because she had done this.
Hmm.
And I said, Mom, this is for you. You weren't a bad girl. You were just ahead of your time.
Mhm.
You know, that it is, it was a different way. It was such a definition. I mean, to think of a hymen being the definition of whether you were going to be allowed to be considered a full, a good woman, a full participant in the real world of good women, of the one non-regenerative organ, as Thomas Hardy put it.
Mhm.
That is actually amazing. And so yes, there is that, but it's still the fear of degrading. I mean, that is how the idea of being a slut, of having too much sex, is still something girls are about and are still taught about. They are still told that, in certain schools or in certain groups, that it's, think of yourself as a rose, and if you allow all your petals to be plucked off, then the man who marries you is just going to get a stalk with thorns on it. And
Oh,
that's what and I heard a girl tell me about hearing that in her high school.
really? That's an
Yeah,
interesting one. Well, huh.
yeah, yeah, that scared me. And I'm
I
thinking,
thought,
well,
so
yeah,
I thought this book was intriguing when I read it because I thought the women had a lot of courage, especially the older ones saying what they did. And to
yeah,
me, it's the most profound book, and it really went to the core of womanhood, really. I know there were parts that were funny, but I saw it from a different viewpoint and said,
no.
these women were really very courageous to
I
do
Mhm.
what they
thank you
did.
thank you for saying that, Elsie, because it really, there were writers who I felt like I knew well enough to be able to say, I know your initial idea, the initial idea that they pitched was funny, but how about if you give me something that was scarier?
Mhm.
If we're really, you give me something that really gets at a story that has been hard for you to talk about, that that your courage is something that other people reading this can borrow from. If they need to get something from you that they can borrow on a day when they don't have their own courage.
Mhm.
And so, I mean, Fierce did that and the rest, but this was something about when you felt like you had been knocked down and you couldn't get up,
Exactly.
Mhm.
Right.
and somebody could reach out and said, look, I've been there. This is how you get out. This
Mhm.
is what you have to do. That it literally, and it's a former student of mine, a woman who had her PhD in fine art, who did the cover. She
Oh, I
painted the
love
cover
the cover.
Yeah.
I thought it
actually, and
was you with your high heels.
that's a compliment now that I've had all that foot surgery. But yeah, so these, she painted this, and I love that the woman on the cover is rising, that she's going up the stairs.
Mhm. Mhm.
She's coming up out of wherever, she's been. And that, so going back to the idea of motherhood, so there are essays about terminating a pregnancy. There are essays about not being able to get pregnant, about having difficulties getting pregnant. There are ones about deciding not wanting to have children. One piece by Ebony Murphy Root was about making a decision, and she turned 40 this year, on not wanting to have kids. And it
Mhm.
was excerpted in Dame magazine, which is a great publication. And because she's saying, as a Black woman with an education, who is successful in life, that people keep coming up to her and saying, well, you have to have children. You owe it to the world to, like, make other people like you. And she's like, nah, actually, I'm a teacher. I love working. I love being in the lives of children. It is not my job to do this. It's like, I work with them all day. I don't have to take them home. I'm
Yeah.
happy to be in their lives, but they are not mine. This is a decision I made, and I am not going to be accused of not doing my bit as a woman by not having children. And so it comes at motherhood in all of these different forms. It's fascinating to see the perspectives that people take on exactly the same topic, but come at it through all these different lenses.
Mm. Yeah, like Elsie, I found it this particular collection to be a little more serious, and I love that about it, because that wasn't exactly what I was expecting. I was expecting 75 essays of women laughing at themselves, and and this is a much deeper book, a much more valuable book, I think.
Thank you. Thank you.
Because of
I
that.
think I think it really people came to it with a lot of self-reflection.
Mhm.
That they really did. Just to read you some of the what I did with the TOC in this one was to have pull lines from the different writers, so that let's say, for example, Lynn Perrell writes summer of 1976. At 15, I was immortal. My parents might not have seen it that way. Lisa Douglas writes about going to a doctor's appointment and says, titled Paper Robes and Good Panties. Naked is naked, and good panties usually mean good things. But for this doctor's appointment, it meant something else. For Honor Moore, who is a philosopher, a cultural critic, it's called Good Calcium and Red Sky. Sure, I'll sleep with you, but divorce your wife first, she told him. He did. They're married still. That this is, I'm looking for Cindy Eastman. Cindy, do you know what page you're on? I'm looking because they're not in alphabetical order. I'm looking for Cindy Eastman is right here. So Cindy Eastman's essay is Moving Out, Moving In. The apartment was affordable and vacant. My top 2 criteria. I mean, which is a wonderful line. And it's like this is somebody who needs to find a new place to be, and she finds the new place to be. And, to be included in the community or exiled from your own community, there's a lot about figuring out what those boundaries are. Who accepts you, who rejects you, and why? Because there are ones about bad friends. There are ones about, one by Krisha Nelson, Life Alert. I found your handwritten list of things you hate about me. Absolutely amazing. Joyce Saltman, who I mentioned before, hers is Virgins and Sluts Then and Now. I became a fallen woman and allowed myself to sample some of life's delicacies in the form of sexual escapades with new men. That's something that happened to her after her second husband died when she was in her 60s.
Yeah.
That she'd been like a good girl and then decided, like, I don't need to keep doing this.
Yeah.
Why not?
Oh, the 60s and 70s are good. I can tell you.
That's what she was making a very good point, a very good point about this. And so it is, it's really fascinating to see how people, a very young writer called Gingerbread Woman, people want to cover you unless they're selling you or selling to you. I thought that was absolutely fascinating. So there are women talking about how they've disappointed their grandmothers, how they either, left behind what their family's visions were for them, or ended up, for better or worse, becoming exactly what their parents told them they were going to be, and had to struggle, with that. I ended up, my family really wasn't sure what was ever, what was in store for me. And I ended up, they always said I was going to end up on 42nd Street. And I did, because I got my PhD at the Graduate Center of the City University of New York, which was across from the New York Public Library, which was on 42nd Street. So it's like I ended up on 42nd Street, but not in the way that my family thought that I would. But
Oh.
you never know, you never know what prophecies you will fulfill, but you also don't know in what capacity you're going to fulfill them. So sometimes they end up being in ways very different from how people predicted. And the ways that fallen, that again, our hardest judges are ourselves. I bet, I don't know everybody in this crowd, but I think that most of the women that I talk to, I do a lot of talks for not-for-profits, for organizations, for fundraisers, for groups, organizations. And when it comes to the question and answers, which I hope we'll do here, we'll have a conversation, that when we really start to talk about our lives, what comes out is how much we have in common. And again, it's being able to tell the story out loud, and that when we think it's just us, and you realize that the person that you think is so perfect and has never made a mistake, and you want to be just like her, where you think, wow, she would never do something like that. She's sitting next to you, go, oh, honey, you have no idea, what I did to be able to get out of something, to get into something, to do whatever. And the stories that we tell when we reveal the vulnerable parts of ourselves are actually the stories that make us stronger. And we're stronger in numbers. We're stronger when we realize that we're not alone. And that's
So
what all of these.
I think
think
you're
this
a great mentor, and I think you're a great mention, all of the above. So I think I see Barbie. Do I see Barbie behind you? Is there a little Barbie
Oh
on
yes,
your-
I have many Barbies. I'm surrounded by Barbies. I loved the Barbie movie.
Oh, I
This
was
Barbie,
going to say,
Yes.
yeah,
this Barbie
okay.
was sent to me by one of the contributors, a great writer named Amy Hartle Sherman. And her essay in the book was one of the ones about sort of family expectations. She came from a family where the women were engineers, had gone to Cornell, where there were high, very formal aspirations. And Amy became a flight attendant. She became a stewardess when she got out of college. She wanted to see the world. She wanted to take herself places, not to be on anybody else's dime. And she took off. She found her place. She grounded herself by putting herself up in the air. And her family, it was like they wanted to rescue her from this terrible decision of independence. And she loved it. She loved it. And her stories have lasted her many years beyond her days as a flight attendant. And she's hilarious, and she knows how to deal with people. Talk about working with the public.
Right.
I mean, if you can work as a flight attendant, you can work as a corrections officer, as a nurse, as an elementary school teacher, as anything, because you have dealt with the universe firsthand in ways that you don't want to. I'm afraid to fly. And I have literally, and I get on planes all the time because I feel like I can't get in front of groups of people and say, face your fears, but I'm taking the bus. I just, I need to have some bits of integrity. I can't do that entirely. But that I have had flight attendants during, especially when I was first starting out for Perfect Husbands and Other Fairy Tales, came out in 94. I did 23 cities in 17 days. I was coming back to teach, and then I'd fly out and go when they sent authors on, not virtual book tours, but book tour, so I'm flying from Nashville to Cincinnati on some tiny plane, and it's going up and down. And flight attendants would come, they could see that it was like legitimate panic. And I had flight attendants come and sit next to me and hold my hand. That I didn't even need to ask, like they knew. And they were some of the kindest people. And then I also heard them, have the plane turned around for some guy who was drunk in aisle 4 and wouldn't stop harassing somebody, and that they would have the plane turned around and take it back. And then people would applaud because they got the guy off the plane, even if the flight was delayed. So they are a great arbiters of human nature. She sent me, Amy, who sent me the Barbie like the day the movie came out, and I went to see Barbie. Did you see it? Did you see it?
How many people saw it in the group?
Yeah.
Oh, it was
okay.
it was lots of fun.
I thought it was terrific, and I thought that it was funny. I did not find that I found it empowering, which is not a word I use too often because it's sort of bankrupt at this point, but I really did. I thought it was funny. I thought Margot Robbie was astonishingly good. I thought that that all of the characters were really dangerously intelligent in terms of what the lines they were given and what they did.
Yeah,
And the idea of the sort of toxic masculinity that Ryan Gosling enacts, and the humor, the idea, the mother-daughter connection, the use of sexuality. I don't want to give the ending away, but one of the ways that you can tell if something is really effective is how many people it scares. And this movie scared a lot of people. And that was like, yes, this does a good job. I mean, Oppenheimer was really unnerving. But talk about not having really good roles for women in a movie. I mean, if I see one more mistress drown in a bathtub because she's, on the edge of a breakdown, I mean, that's a little overdone. I was really happy to see like everybody survive in Barbie. And I was really happy that Barbie did not have to end up marrying Ken just because Ken liked her. That is not enough reason to marry somebody is because they like you. Yes, he likes Barbie. That's not enough of a reason for her to marry him.
And he was so needy, so needy. Oh my God.
So needy. But it wasn't enough. It's like, not just, why did you marry this guy? He kept asking me. There's not enough of a reason. And how many women have actually used that as an excuse? Well, he didn't go away. Like, why are you married? Well, he doesn't hit me. He's not drunk. He's not a drug addict. He's out of jail. It's like, you can do those things by yourself. You can, that's not another reason to give somebody else like house keys. I mean, you can live a drug-free, non-abusive life on your own without having to have somebody switch the station to something you don't want to watch. I mean, that's not, sorry. I don't mean to sound too cynical, but I really, So, and I got to give my husband credit. The first showing I went with a bunch of girlfriends. I went with a friend, her daughter, and a 72-year-old other friend. And then we went out for oysters and champagne. And the second time I went, I dragged my husband, who was 78 and who actually, I had to bribe him by saying I'd take him out to dinner, but he actually enjoyed himself.
And I took my partner, Robin, he's 81.
Yeah.
And he enjoyed it thoroughly. And I have to say, I was surprised. Yeah. I was surprised. It's that good of a movie if you haven't seen it yet. Exactly. Should we open it to other people who might want to say something or make a comment or share your own experiences? Just unmute yourselves and let us know if you have something you'd like to say.
Admit something.
Yes.
Confess something.
Yeah.
Cindy, I'm going to call on you as a contributor. Mm-hmm. Cindy, how did you decide which subject to write on? I can't remember the actual origin story for your piece, which is brilliant.
So, because Fallen Woman was like, that was my role for many years in my small Connecticut town, where I had everything but like the red letter A on the front door of my apartment. So that just like, I know what I'm writing about. And it was a huge deal. I was ostracized from my little group of friends, but it ended up being kind of a really significant, meaningful time of my life. So there was no question what I was going to write about. So.
And I think that the idea of, though, referring to Hester Prynne and the Scarlet Letter, it's the stories that we read about women are all about fallen women, right? She's the interesting character. I mean, from Eve onwards, that's what you hear about.
Yeah, all the good stories are.
Exactly.
Right. You don't feel so interesting at the time. You feel like, I'll just skip behind them. But yes, on reflection. And that's what I think these stories were so much more reflective and, meaningful, I think, than you know, some of the other ones, I think, some of the other books.
Did
People
you feel like you were taking a risk as a writer, putting out there those, you know, the tough time in your life and sort of putting it on paper and recording it and framing it that way?
I think that not personally, not for me personally. You know, when I put that story out there, because you know, in the story, I moved out of my home on the morning after my daughter's 12th birthday slumber party. And it was, and I thought, and I said, it was like, I cringe now. So putting those kinds of stories out there now, and having maybe a family member might glance at it or something, that's the risk. I think that might not have been something that my kids might not have known about at the time. But personally, no, I didn't feel that much of a risk because of the time that I spent doing it and how I kind of came through it. It was like, well, here I am. It's like,
Right. And this is the life that I have made, and this is what's come out of it.
right.
And this, you know, putting our stories into words. I don't know if other people who are attending are writers, but putting something into words, making a story out of it, gives you control over the parts of your life that were chaotic, that at the time when everything was falling apart. You get to almost reverse engineer it when you write it down, when you make a work of art out of it, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
You take those pieces and you reassemble them into something else that you have created. It's not something that was done to you. It's what you make of what happened. And I think
when you retell the story, you're in charge.
Yeah.
Right. And
Yes.
can I just say, I love what you, because I also wrote about this recently about, you know, emerging writers. When you look at emerging writers, it's like, oh, 30 under 30 or something like that. And I have so many writing groups where my emerging writers are 74. And I love that. I love that about, you know, writing and telling stories.
But by the time you hit your 70s, you have some stories to tell.
Yeah, you do.
At least you should, right?
And again, and have the courage, the audacity, the sense of fun on some level, or just the sense of, you know what, I'm not apologizing to anybody anymore. This is my story. This is my story, and I'm sticking to it. Isn't there an old country song with that name? This is my story, and I'm sticking to it. And but it's not. It may not have been, and there are so many essays about that in the book, it may not have been the story that was in the script that was written for you. So that's also the important part, is to go back and do your own revisions, to do your own adaptation of the book of your life. You know, you're making like the screen version or whatever, you're doing the adaptation of it. Yeah. So that's the fun part, is working as an editor, is to see. And now the next book that I've got, God willing, and the waters don't rise, coming out next year, is Fast Famous Women. And that is about women writing about women who have been in public spaces that have influenced them in some way. And this is not like Wikipedia stuff. So the woman writing about Janis Yellen, for example, grew up in the same Brooklyn neighborhood as Janis Yellen. So she's not writing about, you know, American financial systems or the Fed, or, you know, she is writing about what you could be when you were growing up in Brooklyn in those days, and how people with nothing, or everybody going to the same big public high schools, could end up becoming something. And what do you do when you find out that woman who is running governments and, you know, having this global impact, grew up 3 blocks away from me and had the same education I did and made different choices? And so, and you know, it's fascinating discussion. So there were people writing about Lizzie Borden, and there were people writing about Toni Morrison. So it's like whoever the writers chose to do. And this was, you know, it's a more genuine, there were women from all over the world writing about different people who have been prominent in their lives. So it's a it's again, it's a very personal take. What's important to me in terms of the writers is that they take their personal expression and bring it to the page. And I think that that's true. You know, I do a lot of writing workshops, that's essential. That's what we're looking for, is somebody's real voice to
Mhm.
tell us what they think and feel.
You know, one thing that was interesting, I think, in this collection, and I think I read all of them. I'm trying to remember, but I don't think there was any story about someone who, you know, most of us, a lot of us, at least as women, particularly, you know, my generation, coming up through the business world, there were a lot of people, particularly men, and sometimes other women, who would have liked to have seen us fall.
Yeah.
And
Oh, yes.
we're pushing, you know, trying to catch you out making a mistake, trying to show this woman in the office not to be as good at X as the man in the desk next to her. So, you know, that's another, you know, entirely different side to that.
Actually, there's one essay by a woman named Jessie Luca
Yeah.
who talks about the sort of a poisonous friendship, the
Yeah.
woman who you believe is your friend.
Oh,
who
yeah,
turns,
yeah.
You know, to be rooting, but she's talking about it not in a business setting, but in a personal setting.
Yeah.
But that, again, the covert, the poisonous friend, the girl that you don't think is a mean girl, because
Mhm.
you trusted her, and that and Gianna Herrer actually also writes a really interesting one. It's about high school, but it's about making the way that girls are terrifying.
Mhm.
That girls, and Margaret Atwood, you know, is the one who really writes such great stuff about girls growing up, you know, Cat's Eye and the rest of that. But
Yeah.
is the idea of when girls need to make one girl in the group the bad girl,
Mhm.
feed off of her being the bad girl in a way to almost justify themselves as good girls. Well, I don't do what she does. So there's somebody who is like, you know, the totem bad girl of the group. And
Mhm.
that's also it's a fascinating essay. And I think a very brave essay to write about, because that's something that doesn't get spoken about a lot.
Yeah.
Certainly
And
doesn't.
I was also struck by the loneliness of the journey, that, you know, I thought it was quite poignant, because it was a lonely journey for a lot of the women. And I think it continues to be for women. And I think what your book also offers, you know, is just the fact that it can serve as a mentor, if it, you know, as a book for other women, which I think is really a great gift that you've given us. So thank you for that.
Thank you. It is the idea that you're not, you know, you're not just howling at the moon alone.
Mhm.
You know, but you have this, you know, you start to hear the chorus of other voices out there that you thought you were in the wilderness, and then this huge howl comes up, and you think, oh, I'm part of a pack. You
Right.
know, you know, we're all howling at the moon. We may be howling at different parts of the moon,
Right.
but boy, Chris, you know, you make a noise in a group that is really effective. And you all, again, it's this sense of isolation. And that for any group that has been marginalized, even though there are more of us than there are of men, but we've been disenfranchised. We haven't been allowed to have power, to keep power, to own power, to, you know, just being able to vote is recent. There is a wonderful essay by Barbara Cooley about her the reluctance that she faced when she wanted to buy a house. I think this was back in the late 60s, as an unmarried woman, and that she had to jump through all of these hoops. She was a successful businesswoman, and she wanted to buy a house, and they were like, but you're not married, or are you engaged? Or she's like, I have enough money, made enough money to buy a house. I have like American cash. I have like this is money to buy a house. Let me buy a house. And all they wanted was like to discuss her personal life. And this
Oh,
was
gosh.
and this is, you think this isn't that long ago. Again, my students think, well, it was the Jurassic period, I mean, of course, but this wasn't that long ago.
That's
And
right.
again,
That's
what
right.
we need to keep remembering is that we can't risk going back to that, but that the ability to have autonomy, physical and fiscal, that we can do these things, that we're not. There's a wonderful essay on this, the witches of Salem, Massachusetts. Fallen women, and if they, if there was a suspicion that they were fallen, they were then just hanged, burnt. So they got rid of them that way. Exile was too easy for them. And by a woman who just wrote a great historical novel about the witches of Salem, a woman who is an American historical literary figure. She just retired, and she turned her life to writing not academic books. She had all these books published with Oxford University Press, and she said, "No, I'm writing historical novels. That's what I love to read. That's what I'm going to write." At 71,
Yeah.
and done incredibly well. And she's part of the, the Historical Writers Association, romantic history, romance, historical, whatever, Writers Association, and she's loving it. So this has always been there, and we've always thought we're by ourselves. So that's you, Elsie, the idea that somehow you understand that your experience is not isolated, but is collective. And that you have your own version of it, which no one else will, of course, replicate or mirror, but that there is an echo, and that echo is there because of all the social, political, cultural, religious, forces that have shaped our individual lives in certain ways, so that we do resonate with each other. That's how.
But the Me Too movement was certainly one big howl.
Yes. Yes.
By,
absolutely.
Really by so many of us, and but is that howl, though, did that, you think about Roe v. Wade being overturned, and you think of what's happening in Florida and places like that, and you wonder if we need another howl.
Well,
right.
Or that we need to make sure that we're not up for extinction.
Right.
We need to be introduced back into the wild. Some of us. Because it's really, because if things become, they seem too tame, and the hunters are out there and they're curtailing, the perimeters, we're going to be locked out again, and it's going to be too easy to get rid of us. And I really do think that, the wildness of women, and you remember Women Who Run with the Wolves? Wasn't that the title? From that woman who was an anthropologist, and the book was a fairly academic book, and she came up with that great title, and we were like, I run with the wolves. I know what that means, and it's really, a lot of us were just walking with the dogs, but we wanted to run with the wolves.
Right.
I love called to us in a really profound way, and that's why it did so well. And so it's, again, it's having that resonance. It's that feeling that you're not, I put up on Facebook often. I post a lot on Facebook. That's my most natural sort of habitat, and I would get into real conversations on my Facebook page, so I enjoy it, and I put out real questions for people. But every few months, I put up, as much to remind me as anybody else, I put up, you're not nuts, and you're not alone. I need to do that. You're not nuts, and you're not alone. And it is amazing how many people will respond and say, how did you know I needed to hear that today? How did you know that? And I was like, and I put it up because, I think, Cindy, you did that once, because it was really because I needed to, I put it up because I needed to see it come up on my Facebook page today, because I feel nuts and alone. And I realized that what a privileged position I am to have a lot of people around that I can rely on and call on. And, I am enormously lucky and fortunate. And I've worked hard at maintaining relationships, and I take them very seriously. But there are times when you just feel that way. And just to get the call back from somebody, whether you know them well or not, can save your night, save your life, depending on what you're feeling. And other people have done that for me. And if there's a chance that I can gather enough people together to sit at the table, which is what I really feel like Fast Forward Women is like, it's like a dinner party. And like, it's invite people to the table. And so that you invite people to the table, and that, like any dinner party, they're going to be a whole group of, they're sharing appetizers over at one end and they're laughing. And there are other, women sitting having like a serious conversation. And, they've got their heads, in sort of gathered, and they're talking in low voices. And like 4 of them are, on the veranda, the patio, crying outside. And that's fine. It's all of this collection of this range of voices, all of which have a place, and everybody moves to one or the other position and place and affect at some point in her life.
And they're all welcome to the dinner party.
Exactly. And there's enough to go around. There's enough to go around. It's not like, we make room. You have to invite us in, and we make everybody else comfortable. And that's what I hope that in Fast Fallen Women and in the Fast Women series, that the readers feel comfortable. The writers have made them comfortable. Everybody's pulled out a chair and said, sit, read, listen, tell me your story. And
well, you succeeded at that, Gina. You brought together a wonderful group of women to write wonderful stories. And these collections get better and better and better and better, I have to say. So keep doing it. Does anybody have anything you'd like to add? I mean, before we wrap up for the evening? Yes, Karma, could you unmute yourself?
I would just like to say thank you. Thank you from Chautauqua, but thank you very much, Gina, for what you do on a couple of fronts. One of which is encouraging a very creative art form. I believe I call myself a pathological minimalist, and I just love what you do. But also from a psychological standpoint, you're encouraging people to look at things in different ways and change their lives and make different decisions. So thank you on both fronts. Thank you for what you're doing on both fronts. Thank you for your generosity. I appreciate that. That means a lot to me. That really does. Thank you, Barbara. And there's Barbara Cooley. I was just talking about your essay, Barbara. I was just talking about the idea of going out and buying the house, and they're giving you such a hard time. And, you're going in there with American money to buy the house, and they're going, no, she looks a little shady. We don't think we're going to let her buy it. She's a woman. What is she going to do? How'd she get this money? What's she going to do with this money? You missed a good story about your story, Barbara.
Karma wants to say something else. Yes,
on that note, I would just like to say that I remember when my second career and the one that I liked the most was renovating. But my husband had to sign for me to get my first mortgage. So.
Oh yeah, well that was true. I think I know Karma's a friend, and I think in our generation you couldn't get a credit card, you couldn't get a mortgage, couldn't buy a car without a husband's approval or your dad's approval, or some male approval. So I mean, it's just, and I don't want to go back there.
No.
I mean, Gina, you are with so many young people. How do you, can you relate to us how they feel about some of these things? How are they thinking? Are they going to be our salvation, as we hope?
Well, it's a great question. Thank you for asking, Linda. It is, I really still love teaching. That's why I keep doing it. And last night in the creative writing class, I said, okay, I need you, the only way this works is that you're honest, and it's never confessional. I always say, we talk about the writing, we talk about, style. You want to talk about emotions, bring a cup of coffee. I'll talk to you for 5 hours in my office. But in the class, we talk about your work, what you have on the page, right? And how to get how you feel and what you think onto the page. And, but I said, okay, I'm going to ask you a question. How do you get your news? because these now were really 18 and 19-year-olds. And I said, but I need you to be honest. I know you know what the right answer is and that your old teacher wants you to read the paper. And I know that most of you don't. But I said, so what do you do to get the news? And out of 17 in the class, like 10 or 12, and there were in an interesting dynamic, because usually the other way, but there were more young men than women in this class. So probably 8 of the boys and 4 girls said, I hear it from people I know. And I said, not even social media, not, Apple News or your phone. And another girl said, well, I still go on Twitter. I don't call it X. I go on Twitter and I see what's trending. And she said, and sometimes that's like an earthquake. And sometimes it's like Kim Kardashian shoes. So it's like whatever's trending. So it's like, okay. But the other people, it scared me more, made me more nervous and anxious about the future when these people said, I hear it from people I know. Because I said, okay, you're going back, you're taking us back. I said, my tide's going out, your tide's coming in. So the people that I went to high school and college with are now retiring from running the world. The people you went to high school and college with are about to start running the world. I said, you all better be scared, trust me, from having seen my bunch. But I said, you realize that we're going back to the 14th century where the information you're getting about the world is coming from gossip. This is the 14th century where it took 3 days to find out that the town 2 counties over had burnt down. And by the time it reaches you, they're saying, well, the devil went to Caudry Lane and set fire to the hearth because the women there were dancing at night. And so there had to be, but that there's no fact, there's no proof, there's no evidence, there's no anything. You're really just listening to what people around you were talking about. And I said, you go look it up. And they were like, you said, be honest. It's like, no. It's like what people are, what they're talking about. And there's one guy who was like, I read the paper when I go home. My parents get the paper. I read the paper when I go home. And somebody else is saying, well, I go, I'll go on TikTok. TikTok has some interesting people doing stuff about the news. And again, I understand that people do, young people and some not so young people love TikTok, but I have too long an attention span. It's like, I see that and I have no idea what just happened. I feel I just like, what, I don't know what happened. I say, you can already tell from hearing me speak, I can't say something in a phrase, to get people to 750 words. That was the hardest part of doing the book.
Yeah.
So to get a TikTok short, I am like, nah. So maybe they will figure out. I mean, Kara just said she's a minimalist. That's great. There is beauty in being able to do it in the smallest, most elegant world that can evoke everything and leaves it to the recipient of the art to bring to the work of art everything that needs to be done.
Yeah, but look where Twitter got us, though. What's that 120 characters or whatever that is?
But it was spooky. So with the question about what's coming next, for them, I do believe that they do not feel responsible for the world that they're part of right now. And these are smart kids. I mean, they have to write the class. And I feel that they are disengaged from they loathe politics. They don't want either side. They feel like they're being sold a bill of goods on both sides. They don't trust anybody, and it scares me deeply. It scares me deeply. Wow. And the chat GPT stuff,
wow.
I've used it now. I see what it can do, and I find it very unnerving. So we should have big parties now, eat the good stuff, enjoy yourself. It's like,
Right.
No, I don't think we should count on them as being the hope of the future. I think we need to open the present like the gift it is and be able to enjoy it in real time.
Enjoy, yes, real time. That's right.
Gina, what they need is a good old Italian Sunday gravy dinner or lunch or whatever. They've lost a sense of who they are. Well, I don't know if they ever had a sense of who they are, but we grew up in families where we did sit around the dinner table and everyone joined in. So I wish that for them too. But what you shared with us has been absolutely incredible. And I also think of the fallen women. Like I was a teacher for many years and I taught emotionally disturbed children and I saw the worst of the worst. And I thought of these women every day who had to pick themselves up literally to go on, and raise a child alone under horrible circumstances and somehow make it through the day. So you're offering hope to a lot of women too.
Well, again, just strength in numbers. And I think
Right.
that we need to rely on that more than we do, and to understand that, again, there are more of us out there.
Yeah,
That's-
more of us and groups of friends getting
Mhm.
together, Gina, as you said, to howl
Yes,
Yes.
regularly.
that's
Right,
that's what we'll take away from tonight. So
right. That's
Right.
the message. That's the message.
Thank you, Gina.
Thank you, Gina, for being
thank
here.
you for coming. Thank you
delight.
for coming.
The
So
delight.
get the books, your holiday shopping, and I have, and Georgia and Elsie, I'm happy to do this. I had book plates made. So if
Oh,
people
great.
want, I will
Oh, good.
so if people want them signed copies,
Right.
they can buy the book at Bookstore One, and then I will sign, however, I can sign them as Edith Wharton. It makes the book much more
Right.
valuable. And so I'll do whatever you want and personalize them. You can whatever way you choose. So,
Okay,
hey,
good
thank
deal.
you.
Thank you,
Gina.
Gina.
Thank you, Gina. Thank you, Georgia.
Thank you, Georgia. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks.
you.
See you again.
Good night.
Good
Good
night.
Good night.
Good night.